Good afternoon. This Veterans History Project interview is with Sergeant Major Julie Guerra, United States Army, retired, on September the 10th, 2024, at the Association of the United States Army in Arlington, Virginia. Sergeant Major Guerra, to begin, thank you for your many years of service to our nation. So how many years did you serve in the Army, please? And what rank and what position of responsibility did you retire?
I served 29 years, 5 months and 18 days, but who's counting? And I retired out of the Pentagon as the Headquarters Department of the Army G2 Sergeant Major.
And would you please share with us a little bit about your childhood, your parents, the schools you attended, and what led you to serve in the Army?
Sure. So I was born and raised in Arizona, in Tucson, and actually born in Sierra Vista, Arizona, which is kind of goes back into my Army history and story and how I ended up here. When I was 14 years old, my dad, who was a pastor, was sent to Terre Haute, Indiana, which is where I attended high school, and promptly left after graduating high school. I did about a semester, a little over a semester at Cochise College in Sierra Vista, which is where I moved back to. And then I did that until I joined the Army at 19 years old.
And why did you choose to enlist? And did you feel a call to service at that time?
So I'll answer the second one first. I didn't feel a call to service only because I really didn't have a family history of military service. So my mom's father, he had joined the Army, and but I really wasn't part of that community. He retired. He was a signal officer, retired out of Fort Huachuca at Sierra Vista. And I knew that there was an Army installation there, but it didn't really affect my day-to-day life because in Tucson, where we lived, it was a Air Force community. And so why did I choose the Army? Honestly, I was going to school in Sierra Vista. I hated it. I didn't really have any other plans. I was pre-law, and the premise of doing another 8 to 12 years of education was not a little bit appealing to me at 19 years old. And so I walked into a recruiter's office and said, "Get me out of here," here being Sierra Vista, which is hilarious because as an intel professional, of course, I ended up back there multiple times. And so that's really why the Army. I chose initially military police. I'm 5'2.5", and at the time in 1994, they had a height requirement for females, and I did not meet that requirement. So I ended up with my ASVAB scores. I had other opportunities, and Intel was one of them. And so they were able to talk me into counterintelligence agent at MEPS, which was not a hard sell based on the community and the career path.
And you enlisted in the Army. At any time, did you think about other services to enlist with?
I honestly didn't. No, the recruiting office isn't how it is like in other not installations, but communities. It was just the Army. There wasn't like a Navy or a Marine or any other branch that I could walk over and talk to as well. It was the Army, and they were next to Safeway and within walking distance of where I was staying. So it was just all Army all the time. Not to mention that I joined the Army I went to the recruiter in Sierra Vista, and it was outside of an Army installation. So I think that really, to me, there didn't seem to be any other options.
And were you attending college, taking college courses at the time that you enlisted, or was this right after high school graduation?
No, I went to college for a semester, and that's when I decided that pre-law was not for me and joined the Army.
And what did your parents and relatives think about you joining the Army?
So everyone was pretty shocked, just because it didn't really seem like a natural career path for me, which it's funny because anyone that knows me from the time that I was little knows that I always liked to be, I was attention to detail. I liked to be in charge. I ran my siblings like a small fire team, and to get chores and other things done around the house. So the fact that the Army became a career for me, to people that actually know me, there was no surprise. The only person that was not supportive was my dad. He was really adamant against me having military service. And it didn't speak to me the entire time I was in basic training. And oddly enough, up after AIT and up until his death in 2018, he was the biggest supporter of my military career, and had my daughter wears combat boots on his bumper sticker, wore everything Army all the time. Any like recruitment swag that I would like give him, he would wear it proudly as an Army dad. So it's funny that it started out that way but finished completely different.
And I think you said he did not have any military experience his own self.
He didn't. Now, Sierra Vista, my mom and dad met at Buena High School in Sierra Vista. So it's a very small community, nestled in, the Huachuca Mountains. And and he didn't, it's odd because even though the community is very small and the military installation is right up to the border of Sierra Vista, there are a lot of civilians in that area that don't really have an interaction with the military population. That has changed through community outreach and events that they've really done a better collaboration. But then I'd say in the 70s and 80s, it was non-existent. In the 90s, it was a little bit better. I think today it's a completely different community connection that the installation has with Sierra Vista.
Did any of your childhood friends also join the Army? And was there any discussion back and forth between you and your friends in terms of you going to the Army, and whether they might be interested, or did they influence you at all?
Nobody. Childhood friends, again, because I grew up in Tucson. Once I moved to Indiana, back in the 80s, other than snail mail, there was no real way to stay in connection. And after many years, you really fall out of contact with them. Oddly enough, I'm back in contact with a couple of them because of Facebook. But even the people that I went to high school with, I think I was one of maybe two people that joined the military. It wasn't really, Terre Haute, Indiana is not, it doesn't really it has a university, but it doesn't have really any industry there. And so there's a National Guard headquarters that was right next to our training area, that was right next to my high school. But other than that, there was no military community that connected that specific city in Indiana. So no, there wasn't really any focus on military service, at least then. I don't know. It might be better now.
Well, you must have been pretty self-confident, a self-starter, in that you made this decision. Your father wasn't supporting you. Other family members were, but you didn't have a strong group of friends one way or the other with regards to encouraging you to enlist. You made this decision all on your own.
Yeah, I did. I was supposed to join with a friend of mine. We went to MEPS together. We both chose Intel. And literally the last day, because you have to raise your right hand 3 times to do the oath of enlistment, she didn't do the 3rd time and didn't sign the contract. And I ended up going to basic training by myself. So for me, she had a really strong family element that really, and her father was in the Army. So when she decided that she wasn't going to do it, she had something to go back to. I didn't. At the time, I was living on my dad's mother's couch, and I was working at Subway and Dairy Queen on Fry Boulevard in Sierra Vista. Didn't have a car. Can't really live off of, fast food wages. So this was it for me. And I joined the Army for the GI Bill. So I was going to have college paid for, 4-year contract. That was all I was intending to do. And so for me, there was no other option. This was my parachute. So I had to just push through and and just get it done.
Very good. And so you've spoken a little bit about going military intelligence and basic training, and then AIT, advanced individual training. Could you tell us a little bit about the process of, you went to the MEP, you were sworn in, and tell us, if you would please, a little about that whole process, what you experienced starting and then going through basic training and then going through advanced individual training. How did that all work out for you?
So basic training was really not that hard for me. I mean, physically, I was not in the best shape. That really doesn't matter when you go to basic training. You're going to get there. That's entirely what drill sergeants, and as a former drill sergeant, that's our job, is to get everyone to a physical level so that at least there's a baseline that they can start from. Um, so basic wasn't really that hard for me. I was a little bit older than some of the girls, um, wasn't homesick, didn't have anything to go back to, So for me, really becoming part of that community was seamless. It's just back in 1994 when I joined the Army, it was still segregated. So it was an all-female company, and that comes with its own set of challenges. Getting that many personalities and to kind of collaborate versus be confrontational. And but basically, it didn't really affect me in the way that it was hard or it was a culture shock or anything like that. My dad, as a pastor, was very strict. And so for me, like following the rules, I had an older brother and a younger brother that messed up consistently. And I used that as a learning tool throughout my childhood of what not to do. So for me, just doing what I was told was not hard. And I like bent the rules sometimes, I think like anyone does, but like actually getting in trouble, that never happened, or, making myself a target. AIT, well, when I got there, I was a hold under, which means you're waiting to start training. And I was a hold under for about 4 months, I believe. And then they started up a class of about 21 hold unders that we were all waiting, and just pivoted and did like a smaller class. And so we started training for counterintelligence. We did surveillance. We learned report writing. We learned rapport building. We learned how to do investigations, how to do, interviews, walk-in interviews, subject interviews, for all things in regards to espionage, insider threat, counter, that kind of stuff. So it was really exciting. It was really interesting. It was not what I expected when I joined the Army and they told me about the training. They made it sound, and maybe this is not their fault, the recruiters at MEPS, but they made it sound like I was going to be Olivia Benson. Like I was going to have a badge and a gun. I was so excited. Counterintelligence agent it's a great career path. It's very exciting. It can be, especially if you're in the right assignments. It is not Olivia Benson. So for me, that was a little bit of a disappointment. But other than that, it was great. We had a really good core group of people that were in our AIT that now, within the last couple months, they've started up a group chat on Facebook Messenger where we've all reconnected. And so it was a pretty amazing experience to be in such a small cohort, where we all became very close and knew each other, and were stationed multiple times together throughout our careers.
Thank you. And it sounds like, based on your personal experience with AIT, you were probably well prepared for your first assignment, but could you tell us a little about your first assignment and how your training prepared, or perhaps in some ways didn't prepare you for what you were expected to perform and do in your first Army unit?
Sure. So my first Army unit was Bravo 524 in Yongsan, Korea. It's part of the 501st Military Intelligence Brigade. So I was, what I didn't know, and was, again, a little bit of a disappointment, was that in order to do investigations, I found this out during AIT, you have to be 21. You can't carry your badge and credentials unless you're 21 years old, which is still the case. I was 19 and turned 20 in basic in AIT. So I didn't have, when I got to my first assignment, the ability to be a badge carrying CI agent. And so I ended up in ops. And because I was really good at keyboarding in high school, which is a class I took, which of course all the digital natives, these kids now, they grow up on devices. It wasn't the same, obviously, in the 90s. So I was one of like 2 people that could actually type with proficiency. So I ended up typing on a typewriter, electric typewriter, the SOP, the standard operating procedures for the company, for the counterintelligence agents. And it really was a good use of a baby CI agent that was not able to carry their badge and credentials. It was a good use of my time. I was able to be, the quality control for investigations, looking at reports. I kept all of these security investigations, numbers wise, on track so that they were being closed out. So I felt ill prepared from a training perspective for what I did. But with the right leadership and some guidance, I was able to, and because I am a self-starter, I was able to really take something that was non-existent and make it a valid program where we knocked down a bunch of targets and got rid of a bunch of backlog, which was nice because I felt like I was contributing.
Very good. Thank you for explaining that. It also seems like even though the situation changed, it was not expected because of things that you were not able to control with regards to your age. And you said you're a self-starter, but also the virtues of being flexible and staying positive
Right.
work to your advantage too. Your desire to contribute to the organization's overall mission, if you
Right.
will.
Yeah. I think being adaptive when you go into any organization is key. I was the cyber school sergeant major, the second cyber school sergeant major when that branch was stood up. It turned 3 and 4, and I think maybe 5 under my leadership with General Hersey and then General Kraft. I was not a SIGINTer, which is really the SIGINT MOS. Were doing a lot of those work roles inside of in cyber operations before it became what it is today. So I didn't have any background or knowledge, and being able to be adaptive and humble enough to know that you're not the smartest person in the room, I think is a key for any job, especially if as you're going up the ranks. Understanding that you're not going to be the smartest person in the room, gravitating to the people that are, and letting them get you smart. I think I learned that very early in my career, to be adaptive and ask a lot of questions, and also just to execute, and just execute without constant, supervision and guidance, and that just the course correct would come with that. But I think that is really how any person in the Army, whether you're a private or a senior sergeant major, the best thing you can do is be adaptive and humble, especially when you're going into something new that you know nothing about, which I would argue is every assignment. Like, you're not going to go to any unit and it's the same. Every single unit is different. It has its own culture, has its own subculture. It has its own rules. It has its own regulation. Like, there's Army things, and then there's organizational things that change with every single assignment.
Absolutely true, and very well said. You for explaining that.
You're welcome.
And you mentioned positive leadership. So you mentioned that you had the experience with some positive leaders. Some of your leaders helped you through your first assignment, through initial training. So could you tell us a little bit about some of these leaders? How were they able to contribute to your development, your training, and forming you as a soldier?
I would say in training, especially, it's the drill sergeants and the instructors. You really don't have a day-to-day interaction with your company leadership unless you're in trouble. So for me, it was really the drill sergeants and the instructors that shaped that training environment and made it a positive one. Very learning-centric, ask questions, be intuitive, be curious. They were never, the whole "there's no such thing as a stupid question," that 100% applied. So I think they fostered an environment where we were free to learn and explore and not be hindered by the classroom aspect of going through training. My first assignment, I will say, I had a really good warrant officer. He was a brand new W01. So he had I think he was a staff sergeant when he went to WOX, and he was amazing as far as providing direction and guidance, kind of keeping the NCOs that were inside that section in line, making sure that the junior soldiers were being trained, making sure that we were doing cross training so there was no single point of failure. So I think that he really, Mr. Bolden, was one of those people that I definitely think made the environment that we were in which could be fraught, especially when you're talking about CI agents that can't do CI things. He made it an environment where we were constantly learning and growing and developing, and allowing us to be adults. Not just because I was a private, I wasn't treated like a kid. I was treated like every other soldier and given responsibilities, deadlines, and tasks, and was expected to do them.
Excellent. And you mentioned the drill sergeant. So when you started with basic training, or and perhaps moving on into advanced individual training, how were the drill sergeants? Were they totally intimidating and scary, or what was how did you find that experience overall?
Some were. I think it had more to do with their their size that made them a little bit more scary. There were some like really big, tall, scary looking drill sergeants that I would avoid eye contact at all costs. So I think that for that, it was that, kind of intimidation without them being intimidating. They just were. And the females, of course, the female drill sergeants are always the worst. I got that all the time as a female drill sergeant, that were the meanest and the scariest. And I think that there's a lot of truth to that. And so in basic, definitely there was a female drill sergeant that was scary. AIT, not so much. We didn't really have a female drill sergeant. Then we had the one kind of floated between companies. And so it really wasn't the same impact. But I mean, I didn't have any bad drill sergeants. And I think that that's not always the case. They did their jobs. Some of them did their job better than others. I wasn't really scared of them because, again, I had a really strict father in a very Hispanic cultured home that at 9 years old, I was put in charge of my siblings. And so for me, being able to tell people what to do and to get them to do it and to make them think that it was their idea was very easy for me because of the environment that I grew up with. And they weren't really scary to me in the sense that, oh my gosh, they're drill sergeants. It was like, yeah, I didn't have the same reaction as some of the other soldiers did. AIT, it's definitely, they ratchet down a lot. And so it's not as intense for all the reasons. But I had really good drill sergeants there. Drill Sergeant Jones, he's a retired CW5. I kept up with him throughout the years. Drill Sergeant Sorensen, who was our drill sergeant, he was great. So I think there were some really good drill sergeants that role modeled good behavior, compassionate leadership, and letting us kind of find our way for the ones of us that, didn't go to a 4-year college, joined the Army young. It was like how to become an adult is really what they tried to facilitate.
Very good. Just similar to, in some ways, to everyday life, there are always those who really strive to make a difference, to excel, to be leaders,
Right.
and those who don't have quite the same amount of enthusiasm.
Yeah.
Thank you
sure.
for explaining. Would you please tell us about your early years in the Army service, what you liked and how you did, and also your first leadership opportunities?
Sure. So my first 3 assignments were in Intelligence and Security Command. And then after that, not again until I was a Brigade Sergeant Major. So I was in very, very specific intel units that were doing intel things. And so I was in Korea, the 524 the first time, went to Fort Eisenhower, then Gordon, and was in the 202nd MI Battalion as a CI agent, and then moved into the staff. And then my third assignment was Korea again with the 532nd, and I was the USFK in the USFK J2. So for U.S. Forces Korea, their joint intel section for the counter intel and human ops is where I was. So by the time I got to Fort Korea, the second time, I was a specialist promotable. So I went to the board at Fort Eisenhower, went to PLDC at Fort Moore, then Benning, and So I was already ready to be a sergeant by the time I went to Korea. I just hadn't made the points yet. So they put me in a section where I was a specialist promotable. There was an E5 sergeant that was in charge of the section, but was not very competent. And so our OIC was a major, and then there was a senior civilian that was over our very small section of 3 soldiers. There was a corporal, there was me, and then there was the E5 sergeant. And so the day that I made points and got promoted to sergeant, they put me in charge of that section and made the E5 work for me. So that was really my first leadership assignment. I was also the floor NCO at the barracks, which is just, in and out processing kind of stuff, making sure that people do their chores, for lack of a better term, and conflict resolution. It's basically a resident advisor for those that have kids in dorms, which I do now. It's the same kind of role with the same level of responsibility. And so I did that for the entire time that I was in Korea the second time.
We've heard the expression or the saying, join the military, join the Army, be part of something that's bigger than you. And it really sounds like, based on your description, the units that you were in really had very important missions to the whole country with international implications. And
Right.
The work you were doing was contributing to that. Could you share a little about your feelings then, what you thought about your work that you were doing in that context?
Sure. So, you don't always feel like you're contributing to a bigger cause. I think that any soldier will say, especially when you're a junior leader, you have no idea what the impact is or the implications of your, particularly as an intel professional, what is being done with that product, like what that report that makes it to the next level that gets pushed through, ends up at a 3-letter agency. You don't know what your impact is. So I think the first time that I really had a sense of what my impact on something bigger than me, bigger than even the Army, was on a NATO mission. When I went to Bosnia in 2001, and it was a NATO mission where we were doing source ops all in northern Bosnia. And for me, I was the only American. I was the only female. We were living in a house outside the wire, that working with other nations, and all of us trying to gain intel about, the genocide, about some of the key players, about some of the leaders in the area, some that had been elected into position but weren't really elected. So it was a lot of that, of kind of getting atmospherics, building relationships. And for me, that was probably the first time that I could visibly see the impact of what it was that I was doing. And, as a junior leader working in the J2, obviously there were things that were going up to the CG, a 4-star of USFK every day, but I had no idea that that's what was being done with my work. And so I think that for me, it just never really, I knew that it was going somewhere, but I didn't know what the impact or implications were of my work until I deployed as a staff sergeant to Bosnia for the first time. And then I really felt like I was contributing to something much greater than me, than the Army, than the nation even. This was something that was potentially going to affect hundreds of thousands of people in a war-torn region.
That makes great sense. And I think oftentimes we have to grow into our careers a little bit before we really realize the impact or how we're contributing. We've talked about this a little bit already, but would you please share with us a little bit about your promotion to sergeant? And for example, what was it like being an NCO for the first time?
So I got promoted to sergeant in Korea, and all of my friends, because I was a sergeant, a specialist promotable, all of my friends were junior NCOs. So I never was in the position of like where some leaders, a lot of leaders in the Army, where they're part of the specialist mafia on Friday, and Monday they're part of the problem. They're part of the institution. So for me, I never really had that. The corporal, when he came in, worked directly for me. The sergeant that was there again wasn't doing the best, and so I when I got promoted and they put me in charge, it was seamless. He had an issue with it, but that was his problem, not mine. And the leadership took care of that so that I didn't have to deal with that conflict. Um, but I, as the floor sergeant and then as the NCOIC of my section, I didn't ever feel like I was ill prepared, and it wasn't an awkward transition from being a specialist promotable to a sergeant because I was a specialist promotable, I didn't hang out with them. So I was hanging out with E5s and E6s because I knew that I was going to get promoted. I didn't allow myself to be in a position where I was friends with somebody that tomorrow I might have to be in charge of.
Thank you for explaining. And then as you progressed in rank in the Army, how did the schools you attended and your Army training, along with mentoring you received, help you to develop and grow as a professional?
Okay, so I'll talk about the schools first. Probably one of the best schools that I went to that really helped me develop into a leader was, I would say, ANOC, which is now the Senior Leader course, where I met a core group of soon-to-be or sitting senior NCOs that I'm still connected to today. We were able at that school to assist each other to become friends, to build our networks. And that was like, even back then you had like, as a staff sergeant promotable, you don't know that you need a network, but you absolutely do. And so it was that ability to do that and to make friends with people and be in a safe space where we were all students and all learning. That was really great. And then after that, I would say the first sergeant course, which is not a thing anymore. The first sergeant course really helped me grow as a technical leader in the leadership aspect. Tools, writing awards, NCOERs, kind of maintaining an FRG, how to build that. And there were certain things that the first sergeant course covered that really helped me hone in as a company first sergeant that I wouldn't have had otherwise. And it was an institutional perspective. Like, you're going to get on the ground training and on the job training in any leadership position, but this was something institutionally that assisted with that. And then after that, I would say the Sergeant Majors Academy, and that was full on a network platform, and it's about building your tribe, building your network, and that for me was the biggest takeaway that I took from it. A lot of it was, there was a lot of work, and I was finishing my degree and training for a marathon, and was a single mom because my husband was deployed, and it was an environment for me to not be in charge of anybody but myself. And so that really, I was able to build that network and build my team as a result.
And could you discuss a little bit about any special particular mentoring that you received during your Army career that was also you look back on now and see that really helped you to grow and develop as a leader?
I would say so. I had she was a really good friend of mine. When I was a staff sergeant, she was a first sergeant, and she showed me what right looked like. She was tough, she was fair, she was fit. Her uniform was always on point, boots were always shined. We used to have boot shining parties, Sunday nights together watching like The Bachelor or something, I don't even remember. But and so Victoria Thomas, she was like that person from a mentor perspective that I wanted to emulate. I looked up to her. She was respected, she was feared, and she was incredibly competent at what she did. And so that for me, from a mentee perspective, I wanted to be that. And then when I was a drill sergeant, I had a brigade sergeant major that really gave me an opportunity that I wouldn't have otherwise had. So I was pregnant with my daughter in my third year as a drill sergeant, and which at the time, because of OIF kicking off, we had every drill sergeant in the Army had been extended involuntarily for a third year. So I was in my third year of that, like past the 6-month mark, and got pregnant with my daughter. And so I was initially supposed to come back and do the rest of my drill sergeant time. And Sergeant Major Tim Mullins, who I just ran into the airport literally like 3 weeks ago, he gave me an opportunity because he met me when I was first a drill sergeant and then saw how I operated as an S3 NCOIC when I was pregnant, and called me when I was on maternity leave still and said, I'm going to give you a company. You're going to be a company first sergeant because I have one female first sergeant in the entire brigade, and I need more senior female leaders to set the example. And so he gave me the opportunity, and I thought, like, as a sergeant first class non-promotable, I was not going to be able to do it. I was ill prepared. I was like, still at home with a newborn baby. But his ability to believe in me and give me that opportunity as a sergeant first class non-promotable, and they sent me to the first sergeant course, I think changed the trajectory of my career, because he took the time as a leader to give me an opportunity and then mentor me through it, and that he didn't have to do it as a brigade sergeant major, and he believed in me more than I believed in myself, and saw something and was like, I'm going to give her a shot. And so, yeah, that was really, really special. Those two people in particular, I highly respect and look up to, and still am grateful for the example that they set and the opportunities I was given.
Thank you for sharing.
Sure.
A great example of leadership by example, so to speak. What was your first deployment, and did you think that you were well prepared for it?
My first
operational
deployment. Yeah. So my first, that was, I was a first sergeant in Bravo 519th, which was the 525 Battlefield Surveillance Brigade at Fort Liberty, then Bragg. Yes, I felt prepared because by the time I took my company, which was probably 6 or 7 months before we deployed for a 15-month deployment, I had already had about a year of first sergeant time under my belt of a basic training company. A basic training company, it's a churn. Every 10 weeks, you're getting a whole new batch of soon-to-be soldiers, civilians that you need to turn into soldiers in a very short time. It's a very repetitive system, but it's very grueling. And so I went from being a drill sergeant to an S3 NCOIC to a first sergeant in a 3-year window. And so for me, I felt from a training perspective and running a company, I was very much prepared for that. I had 12 human collection teams that were all over M&D North, located all over the place. They were located in Samara, Key West, Missoula, Spiker. My entire company was all over the place. And so mission command and trusting your junior leaders was something that I like. Mission command, not with everybody being in the same place. They weren't in choke con range where I could just reach out and grab them. I had to learn how to lead from a operational perspective where they knew what the right thing was to do, even if I wasn't standing over them. And so there was a training apparatus that I was able to harness and iterated with going into the deployment with standards and discipline, whether it was at PT or at a range or at an org day or at a safety brief. Like, there was always, I had a standard that I expected from them, and they had to meet that. And so I think that being able to push them out all over M&D North and trust them with that kind of training, because of what I had experienced as a first sergeant in a basic training company, really, really did prepare me, and it helped me prepare them. And I was blessed. In 15 months, I didn't lose a single soldier, and I had some that were blown up, like more than a few, but I didn't lose a single soldier, and I only had to relieve one team leader, which is pretty significant in 07-08 during the surge. It was very dangerous. It was a high op tempo, and there was a lot of trust that I had to put in those junior leaders. And I'm blessed that I didn't lose anybody, but I'm also fortunate that we had the time and the space to train those junior leaders, staff sergeants and sergeants, to be in charge. And I trusted them to do what they knew was right, and they did.
Could you comment a little bit about how important training was to keep your soldiers alive? How you really saw the benefits of getting that training to the basics to be able to perform and stay alive?
I mean, you can't understate how important training is. I mean, not in this profession. I think that for me, again, coming from a basic training environment where everything is repetitive, it's canned, it's executed the same every single time. Like, you don't have the flexibility in the POI to be like, well, let's add this. Like, there is none of that. And so because of that, I remember the first range that I went to, the guys on the line, like along the range line, weren't wearing their helmets. They had soft caps on. They were out of uniform comparatively to the soldiers that were training. And so there, as a drill sergeant, that was not a thing. Like, you were in the same equipment that the soldiers were in. If they're in full body armor, and a water hydration system and an ACH and iPro and gloves, like, we're all wearing the same thing. And so that standard I immediately set. And then they had to give me range briefs, like before the range and then after the range. And that they had to iterate that a couple times because the PLs didn't always get it the first time. And they're the range officer, the range safety officer. So it was really that attention to detail just in the uniform and the execution of training that I think really prepared them from a training perspective, that when they went down range, they weren't doing silliness. They weren't trying to grow out beards. They weren't, running around with a t-shirt on and, a body armor. They were doing what was right. Most of them. Like, there was a couple times we had to have a course correction, which I think is probably normal, especially when you're geographically separated from your soldiers and their junior leaders. I think that's fairly normal, but it was nothing significant. And I think a lot of that is because in the training environment, they were allowed to make mistakes, but we would iterate. And so it was very redundant on purpose, so that they were well prepared to go and execute their mission.
Great examples. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Would you please share with us a particular act or acts of bravery that you observed during your deployments?
I would have to say there's one in particular that I saw that sticks with me to this day. And I think that, every person that I know probably has a story that is substantial. And for me, it was, I would go and travel to see all of my teams. If frequent flyers on a Chinook or a Black Hawk or a CASA were a thing, on a deployment, I would have excelled, because I was on the road 3 weeks out of the month to go see my teams. And so because my teams were direct support to the organizations, their day-to-day life and who told them what to do did not come from me. It came from other first sergeants and sergeants majors in other organizations. And so I had one team that was attached to a direct support to 101st, and in Samara, there were no female leaders there, and no female soldiers, nothing. I was it. I would go out there and they would have to make a special space for me to sleep. They would have somebody pull security so I could take a shower. And so the first sergeant that was there was an infantryman, had been an infantryman for 20 plus years. And I remember one day I had got there right after a particularly bad firefight, and he had lost a platoon sergeant. And his ability to pivot and continue to lead that company with such a significant loss. They were living in a hotel in Samaras. They were like in the middle of the city. There was always something going on. But and I would say, I would call that brave, because he lost a friend and a fellow soldier and somebody that he had trained with and been stationed with in the 101st for months and years. And he was literally using his own hands to stop the bleeding. And his his capacity to continue to lead in such a really troubling time for that company. They couldn't leave. Like, he couldn't just like leave the headquarters and go to the PX and get a coffee, and like that was it for them. It was their home. It was where they lived. It was where they worked out. It was where they prepared for missions. And it was to be able to have the strength and resiliency and the bravery to continue to lead through something that traumatic was really impressive.
Yes, what a great example. Thank
Absolutely.
you for sharing. And we're shifting a little bit now, would you please share a little bit about the bonds you formed with your fellow soldiers, fellow leaders, fellow non-commissioned officers during your Army career? And you've covered this a little bit.
Yeah.
You could just expand it a little bit.
Yeah, I think it goes without saying that the people that you meet in the Army, it's a special relationship that you have. My husband and I met, we were drill sergeants in the same company, and we have, shared experiences. He was an infantryman and then went special forces. So he's got his own like examples of brotherhood and bonds. And then I have mine with people that throughout my career I connected to. And there's one thing about the Army, it's that, and I say this all the time, I think it's appropriate too, during Suicide Awareness Month, is that you're never in the suck alone. Never. What doesn't matter how bad it is, there's always somebody else that's going through it with you. And that to me is what makes those bonds with my brothers and sisters in arms so much different than I would say the average American corporate experience, because it's a different bond that you're going to create through adversity, through strength, through resiliency, through loss, through combat deployments, through exercises, like all the things. That bond is going to be created, and it's going to be so much stronger than anything else that you will ever know. And 29 years in the Army, I've got some of the best friends in my life, to include my husband, I met because of the Army and because of shared experiences and suck. And we were all in together. And I think that that's an important way to look at the bonds of this community in particular.
Thank you. And continuing to reflect upon your Army career, what leadership lessons did you learn that you carry with you today?
I think trust your subordinates. That's probably something that I've really tried to do. I haven't always done the best, and I'll admit that. But I think trusting my subordinates and building relationships are two things that, especially now, working for a nonprofit with a small group of people that do a ton of things for the Army, trusting that my subordinates are doing what they're supposed to do. I don't have any issues with that. And then building the teams, continuously building on relationships with Army leaders, senior leaders, with sponsors, to continue to do things for our soldiers. Those are two things that, from my leadership time, those are probably the two biggest things that I've brought from that world into this world, off the top of my head. I'm sure I do more, but those are the two that really come to the top of my head.
Those are great. Thank you. Now, would you please share with us a little bit about what it was like to have a family in the Army, raising children or your daughter, and just having a family in the Army, and how that was both helpful and challenging?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to lie. When I got pregnant with my daughter, I was single. My husband and I weren't married yet. We were together, but we weren't married yet. I honestly thought my career was over. I did. And if it wasn't for Tim Mullins, I think that things might have been very different. So being able to go into a leadership position right out of Maternity leave was challenging and one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, other than leave my baby for 15 months. Um, and it made me, I think, a better leader. It made me more empathetic and compassionate, and made me stronger as a person to really be able to push through that. And so being dual military and having a child is a whole other dynamic. So, my husband was deployed multiple times. We were separated. We, I think, in the period of, I believe, like a 6-year time, I had only been under the same roof for like less than 18 months, because I went to the Sergeant Major's Academy. He stayed at Washington State. It was just like, we just kind of all came together when we came together. But co-parenting, especially in that environment, he was the sole parent when I was deployed, and did a fantastic job. Like, she never left the house without her hair done. She always had cute outfits on. He took what he was able to do going through the Q course for Special Forces is, I will never understand or fathom how he got through that. And then, being a single mom multiple times by myself and trying to go through that challenge, I would say the best thing that when it comes to parenting in the Army, is having you have to have a village. You have to have people that you can trust your child with. You have to have people that'll have your back. And when you have a meeting or have UCMJ, they can go to the Child Development Center and pick your kid up. And everywhere that I was stationed, I had that. And I was very fortunate to have, because I had no family, I was very fortunate to have my Army family and friends and family members of my Army family that always stepped in and assisted and became part of that village that many of them we're still in contact with today. So I think that parenting, it is a challenge. It's rewarding in the sense that I was able to offer my child a life that I never could imagine. And she's been to Disneyland like 6 times. She's lived in Korea. She's lived from the West Coast to the East Coast. She came to the Pentagon when I worked there. She's had experiences that 10-year-old Julie couldn't imagine. And now, through my service and my husband's service, we were able to give her an exciting, rewarding, worldly life that makes her completely different than most kids that she's in college with now.
And your examples really relate well to what you said earlier in our discussion about the importance of developing friendships, your network, your relationships with other soldiers and their families.
Right.
What did you do once you retired from the Army? And was it at all challenging for you to transition from the uniform to being a Army civilian, a soldier for life?
A soldier for life. So I did a skill bridge with AUSA for 60 days. Took the month of August, so June, July of 23. Did a skill bridge. Coming out of the Pentagon, I think that the biggest transition for me was that, all my steps counted and I could have my phone. I wasn't in a skiff or inside of a building where I had to go like outside of the courtyard just to get a signal. And so I think that was a huge but amazing adjustment. I think being able to come into an organization where I'm still serving soldiers was a really soft landing, and I get to still see my friends. I still get to be with soldiers, but I can figure out, like my own individuality as the director of NCO and soldier programs and how that relates to them and how I can continue to be, somebody that is helping sponsor events, that is taking care of soldiers, and doing things for my Army camp family and community that I couldn't do as a civilian or as a soldier. I couldn't ask for money. I can do all kinds of things now working for a nonprofit to take care of soldiers that I didn't even think was available to me. Honestly, Mark, I think the biggest transition was like, what do I wear? When you're told what to wear every single day, and it's easy. Like, you don't have to think about what you're going to wear the next day or like how you're going to do your hair or any of that stuff. I had hair down to my waist and was still wearing it at a bun every day, and then finally was like, you know what, let's try something new. cut off 11 inches and was like, let's do this. Got some ear candy, like, let me figure out who I am as Julie, not as Sergeant Major Guerra.
Mhm.
And so I think that for me was probably like the biggest transition. It's been fun. We did some business casual stuff when I was a senior sergeant major. So I had the ability to kind of build some skeleton wardrobe, but really trying to figure out like my day-to-day outfit thing is most times I'm excited about it. Some days it's a little exhausting. I'm like,
Yep.
I wish somebody would just tell me what to wear. But it's been good. It's been a really good transition. I have no complaints. It hasn't really been challenging at all.
Continuing with your new career that you have as a soldier for life, would you tell us a little bit about how you've applied the leadership and management lessons you learned as a serving soldier when you were in the Army to your career now? How are you applying, or how do they apply? Where do you find commonality?
I think the commonality is the people. And, like people ask me why I served. Why did I come into the Army? I came into the Army because of the GI Bill, which I was able to pass off to my daughter, so she gets to go to college using that. Why did I stay? It was the people. And in this position, in this job, it is all about the people. How do I serve the people? How do I supply for the people? How do I continue to build relationships with people so that I can continue to serve the thing that is very important to me, which is the United States Army. And it's always disappointing when you hear somebody that retired after 20 something years and they badmouth the Army, and because the life that they had probably wouldn't be there if it hadn't been for the Army. So for me, I'm incredibly grateful for all the opportunities the Army has given me. I'm incredibly blessed with all the relationships that I've made. And so I think that just being grateful and finding a way to still connect with people is probably the biggest thing that I've brought into from that world into this world is gratitude. Still doing PT, but I don't call it that anymore. I can do it when I want. And I can wear whatever I want, and it might be a hot yoga room or it might be a run, but I don't have to. I get to choose what it is that I want to do, and I think that's fun. And but still being engaged and being grateful for the opportunities that I was given, and being a good spokesperson for the Army I think is something that I did as when I was still in, and I'm still doing now.
So building upon that just a little bit more, how do you think your service in the Army has changed your life for the better, and why?
I would say that I went to high school in a very small town. I went to my high school reunion recently last summer, and I was one of two people that got out of Indiana. Most of the people that I went to high school with, they were still there. And there's nothing wrong with that. I'm not saying there is anything wrong with that. It's a small town. That's pretty typical for small towns in the Midwest. And I think that if I had stayed in college and had done the pre-law route, I wouldn't have been even minutely as fulfilled as I am today. And so I think that it's 100% changed my life. If the opportunities I've been given, the travel, the places that I've been all over the Pacific, all over the world that I've been able to see as a soldier, I wouldn't have been able to do as a civilian. I come from nothing. Our family was very poor, homeless at one point, and I was talking to a social media influencer recently about, he made a post that said the military is the only profession where you can change your status in life and where you can change your class system. You can go from being poor to the middle class just by working hard, saving, being smart about your money choices, which not everybody is. It's fine. I bought way too many shoes and purses. And so I think that being able to, it doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter who your dad is. It doesn't matter, you know, what school you went to. What matters is, can you work hard? Can you lead? Can you be engaged? Can you be confident and fit? Like, these are the things that matter to the Army, and those things are what changed me wholesale as a person, and then took the strengths that I already had and made them even more strong, so that it was now part of the fabric of me as a leader and not just my personality.
Thank you very much. It's quite a terrific testimony. So, would you recommend to young people today to continue serving in the Army, and why?
I would. You know, I wish that there was a requirement to do federal service, much like, you know, Korea has, that where there's a requirement. And I'm not just talking about the military. I think, you know, the police, fire department, EMTs, teachers, and the military. I think that there should be a requirement for all of our young people to do a certain amount of time, 2, 3, 4 years, because that service gets them outside of themselves. It connects them to their community, and it provides all of those things that I just listed. Provides a commonality of discipline and a regiment that young children, like young kids, need. As the mother of an 18-year-old, I can say that that I think that if there was a requirement for every child in America to do something like that, that would be amazing. It would make this nation so much stronger and even better than it already is. So yeah, when I had a soldier that ETS'd and said, I'm done, you know, after 6 years, I always thank them for their service and then make their exit out of the Army something that was positive, because, you know, they're going to go home and they're going to talk to their friends about the Army. And so for me, I think that, yeah, a career in service is amazing. However long you do it, it's more than the average person is doing.
What concluding comments would you like to make with regards to this discussion we've had in your life's experiences?
I think that probably what I would end with is that, you know, the military, being in the U.S. Army, which is the only branch that I can really speak about, it's difficult, it's challenging, it's a sacrifice. You're sacrificing your body, you're sacrificing time with your family, time with your friends, you're sacrificing stability in your child's life. If you're a parent, you're sacrificing having a connection to the community in which you serve, because you're always preparing for something, executing something, doing something. There's just no time to be part of that community. And so I think that in spite of all that, it's the best thing that I've ever done. I've met the best people. I've seen amazing things. I've seen scary things. I've got unbreakable bonds that I've made with people through shared experience and loss and turmoil and, you know, fear and danger and all the things. And so I wouldn't do anything differently. 29 years is a long time to do anything. It's a really long time to do the Army. And I'm grateful for the time that I did have and that I was able to contribute in any meaningful way. And so a career in service is, especially in service to our nation, is the highest calling that anybody can do. And so I continuously encourage that. And I think that if more people talked about what a positive, life-changing, you know, class-changing experience this could be, that more people would use it as an option.
Well said. Sergeant Major Guerra, it has indeed been a great pleasure and an honor to interview you for this Veterans History Project. All the best to you, and thank you so much for your many years of service.
Thank you, Mark.